The Wuhan virus has killed more than 280,000 people. It has wiped out more than $1 trillion of wealth. But China isn't done yet. It is using its military to do more damage and further destabilize the world. It started with the South China Sea, then the East China Sea, and now Chinese troops have clashed with Indian soldiers in Sikkim. This happened 5,000 meters above sea level at the Naku sector in Sikkim. The Indian Army described it as a temporary and short-duration face-off. They disengaged after the commanders on both sides spoke to each other. 7 Chinese and 4 Indian troops were hurt. This sector does not usually see face-offs. But in the past few years, clashes have been reported. With the Chinese increasing incursions, the Indian Army has been pushing back. And while Naku is relatively new to such clashes, border confrontations between Indian and Chinese troops is not new. India and China have a long border dispute. China also stakes claim to 90,000 square kilometers of Indian territory. There are 3 areas of dispute. First is Arunachal Pradesh. China stakes claim to the entire state. Beijing calls it South Tibet. Needless to say, India doesn't agree. Next is Sikkim. It's a border dispute. And then we have Jammu and Kashmir. There's a dispute over the border. China also stakes claim to Aksai Chin. So how does China explain this latest provocation? It issued a very generic, by-the-book response on the clashes today.
Chinese border troops have been committed to maintaining peace and tranquility in the border area between China and India. China and India maintain close communication and coordination on border affairs through existing channels. This year is the 70th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between China and India. At present, the two countries are working together to fight against the COVID-19 epidemic. Against such a backdrop, the two sides should meet each other halfway, properly control and deal with differences, effectively maintain peace and stability in the border areas, and create favorable conditions for the anti-epidemic cooperation.
India and China border disputes are not new. They've been on since 1962. So why is this one worrying? Because 3 years ago, things came to a head in Doklam. More than 2 months of tense eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation. Months later, a summit in Wuhan, of all places, helped calm nerves. And now, in the wake of the Wuhan virus pandemic, China is stepping up activity again. Sources tell us that the Indian side sought flag meetings, at least on 2 occasions in the last month or so. Both the times, the Chinese side refused. They were in no mood to talk, it seems. And this is not an isolated incident. Notice the pattern here. China has been flexing its military muscles, stoking multiple territorial disputes and eyeing military gains during a pandemic. Look at some of the recent events. The Chinese military has conducted exercises near Taiwan. It has bullied smaller countries in the South China Sea. It has intruded into Japanese waters in the East China Sea. This is no longer just muscle flexing. This is a provocation. It's an escalation. At a time when China's rivals are vulnerable, what does it stand to gain? Why are the South China Sea and the East China Sea so important to Beijing? I can give you 3 reasons. 1, they are critical commercial gateways for shipping. 2, these are rich fishing areas. And 3, they could have major reserves of oil and gas. I'll break it down for you one by one. Let's start with the South China Sea dispute. This region is one of the world's busiest shipping routes. More than $3 trillion worth of trade passes through this region, South China Sea. There are vast oil and gas reserves beneath the seabed. A 2010 study claimed that there is at least 750 million barrels of oil here. And there's a 95% chance it will be found. Of course, China wants it. The South China Sea dispute is spread out across hundreds of tiny islands, reefs and their surrounding waters. China stakes claim to almost the entire region. They use the 9-dash line to make this claim. What is the 9-dash line? It's a dotted line. It was first inscribed in the Chinese map in 1947. It forms the basis of China's claims. The Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei and Taiwan have overlapping claims over parts of the South China Sea. Something similar is playing out in the East China Sea. On Saturday, Chinese Coast Guard vessels entered Japanese territory again. And this is where it happened. Look at the map. The East China Sea. The dispute is over an archipelago of 8 islands. China calls the islands Diaoyu. Japan stakes claim over the same islands. They call them Senkaku. Yet again, there are potential oil and gas reserves here. One estimate says 200 million barrels of oil can be extracted from the sea. And just like the South China Sea, this region too is close to shipping routes. It has rich fishing areas. They say a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. China is following this mantra, not wasting a crisis of its own making, trying to grab territory when the world is trying to save its citizens from a virus that came from China.